Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Women's Football Show. I'm Lily Saunders. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Kathryn Batte. Kathryn is a women's football reporter for the Telegraph, but has also previously worked with the Daily Mail and the Liverpool Echo. So, a wealth of journalism experience here for us today. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Kathryn.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, and sometimes I forget I used to work at the Liverpool Echo because that feels like so long ago. So when you mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, I did used to work for them very briefly.
Well, we all start somewhere, don't we? This is, I suppose, this will be on my LinkedIn profile too. So yeah, we'll get into a little bit about your career later on in the show. Firstly, just a reminder to the viewers about our fantastic website www.forfoxsake.news. You can subscribe for £5 a month or £50 for the year, and it's a fantastic way to get lots of exclusive insight into all things Leicester City and with a dedicated page to the women's team. So be sure to head on over to foxsake.news to get yourself signed up, and we'll be sending all the brilliant articles your way. Now, I want to start quickly by obviously saying we didn't have a match against Arsenal this weekend. They won their Champions Cup final. So that will be rescheduled. So probably a good thing for Leicester, Kathryn, in the sense that they came off of a disappointing loss against West Ham. And sort of it gives them an extra week to rebuild and really focus on gelling as a team, because they've had quite a few new signings in the January window, as we've mentioned a lot previously on the show. So do you think this will be a good opportunity for them to really kind of gel and get some cohesion before the Man United fixture?
Yeah, I mean they've had an extra week to prepare for it, a little bit more time than Man United, and I think if they hadn't played Arsenal last week, it probably wasn't a great time to play Arsenal off the back of a win against Chelsea. They're probably in quite confident mood, so maybe kind of delaying that until later in the season isn't the worst thing in the world. I know football players, they always say when they lose a game they want to kind of get straight back out there and go again. So there's maybe that angle of it a little bit, but yeah, I think having an extra week when you've got new players in, new signings, having more time on the training ground is never a bad thing.
I totally agree. And we've actually had some more positive news today from Rick Passmore in terms of injury updates, which I'm sure the viewers will find encouraging. So there's still a little bit of uncertainty, or there was previously, about Janina Leitzig. Obviously, she had a fantastic first half of the season, was pretty central to a lot of Leicester's reduced scores. I think she made some great saves. She got 3 clean sheets. So, but Rick has said that she was training today and apparently did some extra work. So the medical team will review that ahead of the match. Heather Payne is back in training and has featured on the bench a few times already recently. So it'll be interesting to see how she fares with the addition of all these new signings, where she'll kind of slot in. And then Denny Draper is back running, we saw on social media, which was very encouraging. But Rick Passmore said it'd be quite a few weeks until she's back in the matchday squad. And obviously Celeste Beret and Jutta Rantal are both still out with long-term knee injuries, ACL and meniscus respectively. So lots of encouraging news. We've also had the addition of the signings. The January window's now pretty much over. How have you sort of how have you thought that Leicester have got on so far this season, Kathryn? And what do you think with regards to these injuries and with regards to the new signings? Where do you see Leicester faring as we come towards the end of the season?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think going into the season, I was quite worried about Leicester just because of the uncertainty around Amandine leaving. I really, really like Rick Passmore. I really kind of respect him as a manager, and he was maybe a little bit surprised to find himself in the role, having been out of top flight management for quite a long time. But one thing you will say with Rick is that he's so experienced. He was always going to make his team hard to beat, and I think barring maybe the first game of the season, which was against Man United, I think they have done a pretty good job of that. And I think he's done a pretty good job in terms of working with what he had. I think, he probably knew he needed to get more experience in the January transfer window. He's done that. He's added some really experienced players. Leicester obviously got quite a young squad. I think that was one of the key things, obviously looking ahead at the start of the season. But I think the fact that they were kind of consistently picking up points, they might not have been winning a lot of games, but just picking up draws here and there was quite encouraging. And, the fact that they were obviously above, West Ham, Liverpool, and sort of in and around there with Everton at Christmas time was pretty encouraging first half of the season. And he'll just want more of the same, I imagine, going into the second half. Maybe hopefully trying to build a little bit more, maybe get a few more wins on the board. But I mean, if he can make sure that the club is safe come the end of the season, and I think it's a pretty good job.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important to talk about Rick Passmore actually a little bit because, like I say, with the injuries, and he put a lot of emphasis on Denny Draper coming back, and he puts a lot of emphasis on the importance of growing and progressing the academy players. And obviously, historically, Leicester has had a very young team in the WSL. So it's very encouraging to see that he is thinking about his legacy, as we've talked about before. And it's good to see how he's implemented that throughout the season. Like you say, they've picked up points in draws against West Ham and Villa, which have been great. And that win against London City was the icing on the cake, really. So yeah, Leicester, we sit in 10th at the moment. We're still not clear from that relegation playoff. It's all to play for, but I agree with you. It's looking really encouraging, and I'm really excited to see where they go. Let's talk a little bit about you then, Kathryn, because this is obviously great for us. We get real niche insight into the world of women's football, because journalists, they know everything. So talk to us a little bit. We'll go back to the Liverpool Echo. Talk to us a little bit about your early career and how you got into sports journalism.
Yeah, so I mean, I always loved football growing up, and I had an interest in women's football because I watched a lot of England when I was younger. So I knew that it was a sport that was growing, and I once I started out in journalism, I did kind of want to go into that area. And after I did my master's degree at Sheffield, I got a traineeship with the Mail Online, and essentially they sent out all their trainees out on a regional placement for 5 or 6 months, and mine was in Liverpool with the Liverpool Echo. And they've obviously got a brilliant sports team, two huge teams in the area, and two teams in women's football that had historically had quite a lot of success, but at the time and in more recent years, obviously have struggled a little bit. And there wasn't really anyone there doing much on the two women's teams, so I kind of made that my thing to sort of go and watch them. I think I remember at the time Liverpool. It was actually the season that Liverpool kind of got relegated on points per game because it was the COVID sort of year. So I was kind of there when they were really struggling, and I felt bad having to kind of ask Vicky Jepson every week about another defeat. But she was really great to deal with. So I enjoyed my time there, and then when I came back to the Mail, it was sort of similar that they didn't have anyone sort of doing women's football. And at first, it was a case of sort of doing it in my spare time alongside my role with Mail Online. And then in the build up to the Euros, I switched over to move to the paper to do women's football full time, which is obviously much better. And then, yeah, I was at the Mail for about five and a bit years, 5.5 years, maybe just more. And then probably about four of those was with the newspaper doing women's football. So I was obviously covered the Euros, the World Cup, and then I moved over to the Telegraph at the end of 2024 just for something new and to kind of have the chance to focus on women's football a little bit more because I was doing a bit of men's football at the Mail as well. And yeah, I've loved it at the Telegraph since I've been there. Did the Euros last summer, and yeah, kind of looking forward to having a summer of no tournament and just sort of watching the men's game, and then preparing, hopefully, assuming England do indeed qualify, which we all assume that they will, for Brazil in 2027, which is something to look forward to.
Yes, absolutely. Fingers crossed. Oh, that's so interesting. And we've talked a little bit to other journalists about um, sort of almost not necessarily pioneering role, but like you say, there probably wasn't as much noise around the women's game, and hearing about how professionals like yourself have taken on that role back in those kind of years when there was not that much news on women's football, which is what we're trying to do here at this podcast at For Fox's Sake, is to give real in-depth fan insight and proper journalistic insight into Leicester City women. So it's great to hear all about that and about your experiences as a young reporter. I suppose I want to ask, what was your biggest learning experience as an up and coming journalist, and did that involve women's football in some way?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think there's a few different elements. I mean, there's learning in terms of learning on the job, and I always get one of the always things I always get asked is like, how do you write a match report like on deadline when there's like a last minute goal? And the answer is that you just kind of have to react in the moment, like as much as you can try and prepare. It's really difficult to try and visualize what that last minute goal looks like. And I remember having like someone with me at a game when I was at the Mail, like just sort of along watching, and it was a Nations League game, but when England were trying to qualify for the Olympics on behalf of Team GB, and it was the second to last game in the group, and they played the Netherlands, and
I
basically
remember that game.
they needed to win to have any chance. They ideally needed to win by 2 goals, but a win took it to the last game. And obviously, I think they were 2-0 down, and they came back to win 3-2. And I think they scored the equaliser on sort of like 80 minutes or something. And I remember at the time, I had to file on 80 minutes. For some reason, at the Telegraph, I get to file on a full time whistle, but at the Mail, I had to file 10 minutes before the game actually finished. So I remember filing like that it was a draw and that they were out, but something in me said the momentum was with them. I'm going to start preparing that they go on to win it because it
Mhm.
changes the whole landscape, because then they've still got a chance of qualifying. So there were so many different things to think about. Um, so I did that, and then obviously I think Ella Toone scored maybe with a few minutes left, and thankfully I had kind of prepared everything for them coming back to win and just had a blank space for whoever scored the goal. And that kind of doing that, for some reason I decided to do it, helped me so much during the Euros just gone, when we had multiple last minute goals. The worst of which was the Adjumang one. I say the worst for me, the best for everyone else, but the worst for like a journalist when you're trying to file on deadline. And England were going out, and then with about 3 seconds left, they're going to extra time, and you've still got to file that they've gone to extra time. So I remember having a report written that they were going out and it's all kind of doom and gloom and miserable. But there was still that thing of what had happened in the Sweden game, where you sort of felt like they could come back. So again, I'd started to prepare like they've come back, and sort of left a gap for who scored the goal. And then the fact it was Adjumang just made it a little bit more special, because it was like the young player and the teenage kind of striker, and that sort of, then you feel like you've got to put a bit more spin on it. But actually you realise that it doesn't, the first like edition copy doesn't really matter as long as you file it and it's accurate. You can always make it better for the second edition, which people actually read, because that's a weird thing about newspapers, is that the first edition always only goes to like Cornwall and Devon, I think, and then the rest of the country get the second edition, because obviously in Cornwall and Devon they're just reading that England have gone to extra time and don't know the score, as used to happen. So that was kind of like a good learning curve. And then another one was actually in men's football, um, more to do with like a news story where um, I'd written something about I'd been told that a player was going to miss a game because they were injured. Um, but sometimes in those situations you have to give yourself a bit of an out, even if if the information is good and it's come from a good source and you've been told they're going to miss the game. Sometimes players take injections to make sure they get through the game if it's an important one, and which is what happened in this case. And you've kind of written they're going to miss the game, and then all of a sudden they're in the starting lineup and you look a bit stupid. And I realized in that situation that you've got to write it sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you've got to give yourself an out of saying they're likely to miss the game, or they're facing a battle to be fit, rather than they're gonna miss the game straight, because sometimes things change. And it can be same with transfers. Like, you might get told X player is signing for this club, and it's like, that's where they're going and that's the only club they want to sign for. And then another club might come in right at the last minute, and it changes for various different circumstances. So you have to sometimes hedge your bets, which feels wrong to do in journalism, because you want to be certain, but sometimes you have to just give yourself a little bit of a leeway, because some things, can always change.
Yeah, no, what a great answer. Thank you. My next question was actually going to be, what was your most memorable experience, like writing on women's football? But I'm going to change it to the WSL, because I think it would be quite cool to have some insight into that. Because a lot of our previous guests have talked about the Euros, and as amazing and as fantastic as those were, I'm sure that was probably your favourite memory in general football. I know it would have been mine if I was there. But any particular WSL moments that stick out to you, or perhaps kind of League Cup, FA Cup moments?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when there's been sort of like dramatic games in the WSL. I mean, the season where it was Emma Hayes last season and we thought she'd lost the title. Well, she basically said the title's done, we're not winning it. Um, I guess it's kind of the two games. So I was at the Bristol game where it was her last home game for Chelsea, and Man City had just beaten Arsenal, which gave them a chance, but it sort of meant you're going to have to go and thrash Bristol here, who were already relegated, but it's not a given that you're just going to put loads of goals past them. But lo and behold, they win 8-0, and that was the exact number they needed to go ahead of Man City, which just at that point, you sort of felt like it's written here for Hayes to win it. And then that final game at Old Trafford, where they just sort of blew Man United away. I don't think I've seen like a team so dominant. The way Myra Ramirez bullied Man United's defence on that day was memorable. And where the press box is, because the game was at Old Trafford, is really close to sort of where the important people sit, or players that are injured. And Sam Kerr was in that box, and every goal she just was like standing up cheering, and it was quite close to where we were. So that kind of bit of the WSL where we thought, God, like Emma Hayes, she had this brilliant career at Chelsea, she's won so much, and in her last season she's going to win nothing. It sort of feels a bit wrong. And then she comes back, sort of, when we think it's all gone, they produce these. Well, it ended up being 3 games they had to win, but they produced these performances and win her the title, and it just sort of felt like a fitting exit.
Yeah, I know. I remember that season as well. That was quite something from Chelsea, I have to say. I don't think they'll quite be able to repeat that this season. I think Man City are running away with it now. Um, but brilliant. What a great memory. I'd completely forgotten about that 8-0 Bristol City win for Chelsea. Yeah, that was, I remember looking at that and going, wow. I don't know how they've managed to do that. Someone must have been fixing the match. No, I'm joking. Um, okay, back to Leicester and to the WSL. Which Leicester player has caught your eye so far this season, and why?
Ooh, again, that's a good question. Do you mentioned her earlier, actually, Leipzig. I think the goalkeeper. I mean, I was at the Arsenal game earlier this season, which obviously probably isn't the best one to pick in the terms of it ended up being. I think it was 4-1 in the
It was
end, if I remember
4-1,
rightly.
yeah.
4-1. But even in that game, you felt like she made quite a number of saves. It could have been a lot more. And I do think that goalkeepers don't always get the credit or the praise that they deserve. And I think she is a miss when she's not there. So her being available is a big thing. And yeah, I've always been quite impressed when I've watched her play.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And perhaps in terms of the new signings, I don't know if you've watched any of the recent Leicester games. Have any of the new signings caught your eye in particular?
Um, it's tricky. I mean, I felt really bad for Ashley Neville on the debut with the Tottenham incident, but
Oh, I
we all
was
know kind of,
gutted.
yeah, bless her. I
Yes.
mean, yeah, I think she's a great, like, again, experienced player, and I think she brings a lot to the team. I think Rachel Williams as well. You kind of know what you're getting from her. She's a little bit older now. She might not be able to play 90 minutes every week, but what she does give you is somebody that whether it's from the start or off the bench, can find the goal. And she's got all them like old striker tricks where she can win free kicks. She pops up in the right places, and she's a great person to have in the dressing room as well. So I think those two were really key. I'll be honest, I don't know as much about Emma Janssen. I know she's obviously had an injury as well. But from what Rick Passmore seems to say, he's a player that the club are excited about. And then Alicia Lehmann was the sort of rogue one that I don't think anyone really saw coming.
No.
Again, experienced player in the WSL. She's had a lot of experiences abroad. She does bring something. I don't know if she's going to bring a bucket load of goals, but she adds, she definitely adds to the team. So I do think the club's had quite a good transfer window in January in terms of probably what they needed to adding that experience, which maybe they didn't have in the first half of the season.
Yeah, I think Alicia Lehmann was probably the most surprising one. But like you say, she adds in other areas. I think, yes, you want her to score goals, but I think the coverage that Leicester City will get, the kind of, you'd hope that she boosts the club in terms of their reach to supporters, and hopefully more people start coming to the games just because they want to catch a global superstar. We've had a comment in here from Andy. I'll just pop it up on the screen. Could we have bought too many, and then being able to gel might be an issue and get us into trouble? Well, I'll pose that to you first, Kathryn, and then, yeah, we'll see where we go with that.
I don't think so. I think that's probably the right number of players that the club needed, because you also have to think about depth, and we mentioned injuries in the first part of the show. You never know what other injuries you're going to get in the squad, and you have to have options available, and especially when you're sort of fighting to stay up. So I don't think it's too many. I think it's probably the right number. And I think the fact that they're experienced players that are coming in, like I say with Rachel Williams, she's probably not expecting to start or play 90 minutes every single week, but she knows she's going to play a lot more football at Leicester than she would have done at Manchester United if she'd stayed there. I think it's probably about the right number for a team like Leicester in terms of what they needed to bring in. So I think transfer window is pretty successful.
I agree with you. I think Leicester was sort of barely holding on in terms of injury once it got to December. And I think they've reinforced in all the key areas that they needed to, particularly defensively and in the midfield. And then obviously up top with Lehmann and Rachel Williams. So I'm really excited to see how they get on. I think they'll gel. And I think, like we said before, this extra week will help them out. And we've got a comment here saying we need all the help we can get. Well, I couldn't agree more. Daedalus 215. Every little helps, including Alicia Lehmann's 16 million Instagram followers, or is that TikTok fan? It's one of them, but she's got a lot. She's got a lot. Okay, let's move on to the Man United fixture, because I'm quite excited about this one. I think Man United are always a really interesting team to play. You never quite know what they're going to bring. So, yeah, where do you think, Kathryn, who do you think Leicester need to look out for? And perhaps tactically, what do they need to make sure that they're aware of for this match?
Yeah, I do think Man United seem to be in quite a good run of form. They've sort of overcome that little blip they had maybe in about November time, and they look like a really good team right now. And it's probably not the best time to play them, which I'm not sure I should say. But one thing I've noticed about Man United is that once they go a goal ahead, it's like the floodgates open, and we saw it with Aston Villa last week. We saw it with 2 weeks ago. We saw it when they played Everton earlier in the season. I think Everton had sort of hold on, and then as soon as Man United went ahead, more goals came. So I think the key for Leicester is to try and essentially not to collapse if they do concede, because that is one thing that Man United are very good at doing, is really kind of killing off teams, especially late in the game. And I think it's going to be a case of Leicester need to be switched on for 90 minutes. You can't give teams like Man United any sort of space, because if you do, they will punish you. I think Rolfo at the minute looks like she's in good form. It's interesting with Man United because they switch it around. It's hard to know who's going to start because sometimes Rolfo comes off the bench, sometimes she's in the starting 11, and I actually think she's probably been more effective off the bench as well. Melvin Mallard obviously having a very good season as well. And we've not seen quite as much of Schüler, but obviously again another attacking option there. Vangerheim, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Again, there's another Swedish player, so they've got a lot of options, Man United, and they do look very good going forward. I think for Leicester, it's a case of making themselves really hard to beat and trying to frustrate them as much as they can, and then probably looking to play on the break. But one thing I will say about Leicester is I remember I think it was the first game of the season when they played Man United, and I think it was maybe 4-0. And I remember looking at the highlights of the game and thinking they're in for a really tough season if they defend like that for the rest of the campaign because it was really, really bad. And that's why I feel like they should have a bit of confidence because they've improved so much from that first game. Like defensively, they've tightened up a lot. And I feel like that was probably the worst that I've seen from them defensively, and they've got a lot better. So it might have to be a case of the old low block and trying to frustrate Man United as much as they can, but sometimes you just have to do it.
I think like they played against Manchester City back in end of November. I think they kept them at 0-0 until the 75th minute or something, and that was from pure defensive grit. The same with the Chelsea result actually. Right at the beginning of the season, they reduced Chelsea to just a 1-0 scoreline. So whilst yes, they both ended in losses, I think they probably took a lot of confidence from that, and that's what helped them get those extra points that we talked about earlier on the road and at home. I think it's a home game, so there'll be lots of home support for them. Leicester are known to be a frustrating team to play in terms of their grit in defence. I think Manchester United are interesting in the way that they build up. They tend to have a lot of players back to build up play, whereas sometimes, you have teams playing lopsided, using the wing back and coming forwards and backwards or staying high like Arsenal do. But I think, like you say, where Leicester will get the most success will be on the break, I think, using the likes of Neville and Sarah Mailing. And hopefully they have a bit more cohesion this week. I think they did really well against West Ham, but they couldn't get that final ball into the back of the net. And I think unless they're ruthless in front of goal, it's going to be really difficult to get any sort of result against Manchester United. But I'm always full of confidence. Anyone who's watched the show for the last few episodes knows that I'm always gunning for a Leicester win. So with that being said, do you have a potential what do you think the score's going to be, Kathryn?
Oh, do you know what? There is always a surprise result sort of thrown in every now and again in the WSL, and I'd like to think Leicester can get something from this game. And if there's anyone that knows where Man United's weaknesses are, it is Rachel Williams. So you would hope she'd given Rick Passmore a bit of a brief in terms of who to watch out for and how to play against them. So I think maybe they could pick up a point. I might go with a 1-1 potentially.
I like that. I like this positivity. That was going to be my guess as well. Or actually, maybe I'll go 0-0, only because of what you said about if Manchester United score, they tend to open the floodgates. So I think if Leicester can keep them to a really frustrating 0-0 draw and pick up a really important point, I think that will be a job well done. Obviously every team always wants to win. We want Leicester to win, but I think with considering the run of form that Man United are on, I think that's probably a more likely result. I just had a comment here from our very own Pete Selby. I was impressed with Leicester City women's performance against the Hammers. Just the lack of a cutting edge up front cost City. It looked a penalty from where I was before West Ham scored their second. I agree, Pete. I think we need more consistency from the likes of Shannon O'Brien. I was really impressed with Naomi Mouchon when she came on. I think she really does add an extra dimension. So I think she'll have given Rick Passmore a bit of a headache in terms of selection. hopefully. And then, yeah, we've got some firepower coming off the bench now with Rachel Williams. She'll be looking to get a result against her former club. So, yeah, I think hopefully a draw, even better if we get a win. But thank you so much for coming on, Kathryn. It's been such a pleasure having your insight into the WSL, into women's football in general, and also to hear a little bit about your fantastic career as a women's football reporter. So thank you so much for coming on today.
No, I've enjoyed it, and yeah, what you guys are doing is great in terms of with the podcast and making sure there's a coverage of different teams in the WSL. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. And just a reminder to everyone, head on over to www.forfoxsake.news. You can subscribe for the price of a pint and receive exclusive access to all things Leicester City women, among other things like the men's team. But, it's the women that we want to be talking about today. So thank you so much to all the viewers. And we will see you next week on Tuesday for a little bit of recap on the Man United game and then looking ahead to the next fixture against title leaders, currently Manchester City. Thank you so much. Goodbye.